So I am Sharelle Langaigne, and I am the art therapist at my sister's place. Just a little bit about me and what we do. I work with survivors of domestic violence, and we use art as a means of healing and coping and transforming. And so what I'm going to show you a little bit of today is just one of my favorite tools. This is actually something that I learned in grad school. It's not just specific to the clients that I work with. This is not just something that works with survivors. That's why we're doing it here today. It's something that I actually do on my free time. I find it really helpful and really healing just to sometimes get everything that's going on in my mind out on paper. And sometimes it's really hard to start from a blank canvas. So what an altered book does is it gives you something to start with. And as Haley mentioned, her book happens to be a book she doesn't like. It doesn't have to be a book you hate. It can be any book. The only criteria is that you are okay with this book being transformed or destroyed a little bit. So just know that you're not going to be able to read it through anymore once you're done with it. So I have a few examples to show you, and then I'm going to kind of show you how we do some of these things. Pre-COVID, when the idea for this was that I would be with you all in a room, everyone was going to have their own altered book to go home with. But in order to keep us all safe, we're doing it virtually. And so you can't really follow along as well with me right now, but I definitely encourage you to do as much as you can just because of the time constraints, but then come back to it later. This is something that you should definitely take your time with and enjoy. Just enjoy the process and what you're getting to do. So I have two different books. I've got a chapter book. I got this one just at this place called the Book Nook, and you just go and you can buy books for next to nothing. And so this is, I'm going to show you kind of what you can do when your book has just like a lot of words in it. And then I also have a picture book that I also got at the same place. This one is about birds. For those of you who know me, I'm scared of birds. I don't like birds. So I thought that this would be a cool book to transform. I also have started one with Harry Potter because it's my favorite book. So you can really just go wherever you want to go with this kind of idea. Magazines are my favorite to work with because they also give you something to start with. You don't necessarily have to have an original idea right at that moment. And so collaging is one of my favorite things to do in an altered book. And so for this first one, I looked through the page and thought, I read the page actually, I didn't just look through it. And you don't have to do that, but sometimes I like to just to see like what I don't know what this book is about, where am I starting? And I was trying to decide what jumped out at me. And so once you pick a theme, then you just go for it. On this page, so I collaged over top of the words that were already there. And so this is really nice because there are lots of words in these magazines, right? I have lots of different kinds of magazines. I like to ask for donations of magazines and steal people's old magazines. But we've got cooking, good housekeeping, motorsports, just lots of different things. So you usually get an array of words that you can use. And generally words, pictures, anything that jumps out for you. So the next thing I want to jump into is actually what I should have started with. And it's what to do with these pages. You are more than welcome to just jump right in and start gluing things on your pages. But if you want to do something like paint on them, or if you want the pages to be a little bit more solid, I suggest you buy some gesso. Gesso is kind of like a primer for the pages, and you just coat the page. It'll dry white, but the page will be stiff. In a book this big, sometimes what I like to do is take out some of the pages because I might be adding things into the book to make it a little thick. And so we can't have all these pages in here. And so this first step, I encourage you to jump right in and start. If you have a chapter book, I would start by taking out, I would say, depending on how much you think you're going to do in the book, I would take out close to half of the pages. So don't just tear them all out in one spot though, flip through. and just take out a couple pages at a time so that you have room to work with. Another suggestion that I have is if you have a chapter book or a book where the pages are fairly thin or flimsy, I would now encourage you to use your glue stick to glue a couple pages together so that you have a thicker base to work with. I would say 4 to 5 pages would be nice, depending on what you want to do. If you want to paint on it, I would do a little bit more. If you're just going to glue on there, actually gluing is kind of heavy too, especially if you're using like Elmer's glue and not like a glue stick. So the second thing that I like to do with a book like this is blackout poetry, or creating poetry from the words that are already in the page. And so I'm going to show you a couple ways of doing that. The first thing I want you to do is look through that page and find the words that stand out to you. What we're going to do is we're going to somehow highlight the words that stand out and cover everything else so that it creates its own piece of art. So for this one, the sun is really shining. Okay, cool. I circled the words that were important to me. And then I continued those circles, those concentric circles, to cover the words. It's the rest of the words that were not important. So this one's not finished, but this is just an idea of, as you can see, like down here, I've got these words underlined that I want to come to next. The most common way of doing this is actually just using a Sharpie and blacking out all the other words and simply leaving the words that you are interested in using after that. So let me see, here we go. This one is where I just use a Sharpie to cover the rest of the words and left the words, the important words, free. And I can't see, there's one more. This one. So in this one, I just really covered the page, but you can't really see, but the words that you can see are left uncolored so that when you read through, you can see it. So the first step would be determine what words stand out, right? Read through the page, see what words stand out. Sometimes it's fun to just start covering as you're reading, and so then you'll stop over the words that are important. So I'm gonna read this one to you. I'm honestly not really sure what this book's about, but it got some really cool poems from it. Pretending she was herself, hardly resisting her hands, canceling a remarkable need. So that's simply just from going through and picking out words that felt important or, that I wanted to highlight, and then I circle them and then continued those circles. So moving right along. Oh, here's one more. I got a little bit more exciting with this one. I added some doodles on top of the words. I cut some paper and glued it right in. Another thing that's sometimes nice to do is just using the page as a canvas. Pretend there aren't any words there. And that's kind of what I did here. I used chalk pastels just right on top, but as you can see, with a medium like chalk pastels, it's pretty translucent, so you can still see the words in the background. If I didn't want to see those words, this would be a great place to gesso the page first before I get in there with the chalk pastels. Okay, so over here, I have an example of something that I would glue in. This is just collaged pieces from the magazines. I picked images that were interesting to me and I tore them because I wanted more of a rough look. I didn't feel like using scissors. And so I tore them up and simply collaged them on a piece of paper. And so this is actually going to be the cover of my book. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to glue and then trim this collaged piece onto the front. I didn't actually intend for it to be the cover of the book. That's why I didn't just go right onto the surface. It was just a piece of art, and then I saw the size and I was like, oh, this is perfect for a cover. And so now it's a book cover. So because this is magazines and images, they can they'll like raise up. And so what I encourage you to do is to buy some Mod Podge and just cover over top of that, and they'll create a seal to keep your edges down and everything nice and neat. So I just glued my paper that's too large onto the front of the book, but I kind of like that because if you remember when you were covering your books in school, now I can fold this over and glue it down, and then I'll trim the top. So I glued it down. Just gonna trim off the extra edge. Now we have a new cover for Toby's room. I'm gonna also probably cover the sides with some more magazines. Mod Podge would also be great for this. I can put the Mod Podge down on the book, the binding of the book, put the images right on top, and then put another layer on top to seal it in. So I'm going to jump over to my picture book. So here we have, so these are what the pages look like to begin with. They were just really simple. It's a very odd book, honestly. It's called Where Do Birds Live? And I don't like it. So I am transforming it. And this page has been covered with just acrylic paint. So as you can still see the image in the background. If you were to do a few layers, it would probably get heavier, but I didn't glue these pages together, so I only did one. If you really didn't want to see what was on the other side, I would suggest doing a couple coats of gesso before you go in with the paint. So on this, now that I've added the acrylic paint, I think I want to use maybe some magazine images or more acrylic paint. I can paint directly on here. On this first one, I used tissue paper and Mod Podge right directly on the page. And in the invitation where I said, like, any art supplies that you have lying around, I really mean it. Right here, I had some feathers, and so we glued them in here. Over here, we've got some puff paint on these edges. An altered book is really the place just for any and everything you have lying around. Glitter, googly eyes, everything. All of it belongs. And finally, before I answer any questions, okay. So on this page, what I wanted to show you is kind of like a different idea. So I have my image and I have this square. It intrigues me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the square out, and then I'm going to glue these pages together so it's kind of like a little window. I'll still be able to see what's on the other page. Just kind of really I know this sounds very hippie, but just like let the books kind of guide you, let the book speak to you. I don't necessarily go into this with a solid idea of what I want it to look like. And I kind of just let it transform into itself. So I'm going to cut this out. And so I have a window for this little dot of flowers. So now I'm going to glue this page down. And this is something something you can do in a chapter book as well. It doesn't have to be a picture book. If you want to, I really like the idea of cutting out little areas, little windows, so that you can see something on the other side. Something else cool that you can do is after you've created a window or something to look through, you can cover it. And so I have this piece. I don't like the images on it. So what I'm going to do is collage onto here. And then we'll glue it back down so that it's kind of interactive, right? And so then I can open this up and see what's under there. Let's say I don't like this little duck under here. If I wanted like a note or something that might be cool, is I can take these discarded pages from the other book and measure it out. And I think what I'm actually going to do is make a little flip book underneath here. So I'm going to glue just the tops of these sheets down and keep adding layers until there's like a cover that you have to lift back to see the next layer underneath. So now I've got this here. Looks just like a square, but surprise, there's a duck. And I don't just want that left out there like that, so I'm going to add this right on top. And so now there are a few fun layers to go through. I don't like this, it's cute, but I don't really like this little bird that's right here. So what I'm gonna do is paint right on top of it with some acrylic paint. And then I'm gonna leave that to dry. And then when that's dry, I can go in and use like markers or another medium that I would like to cover up the white square. I think maybe I'll use some pastels and try and mimic the flowers that are on the surrounding page. But due to time constraints, we can't sit and watch paint dry. So I'm gonna let that dry and see where it's at before we get off. And I can try and add something on there. All right. Haley, did we have any questions? Not yet. So ask some questions so that I don't have to just in the meantime, I'm going to go through these magazines and find images that I would like to add to the first book. I guess I can use this time to tell you a little bit more about what it's like working with survivors. In art therapy, I have the really unique experience of we do have, okay, so the question that we have is, can you glue tissue paper? And the answer is yes. It's actually really cool. If you use like Elmer's glue or wet glue, you can use that underneath, and then on top it'll create like a coating, kind of like Mod Podge will, on top of the tissue paper. You can also just use a glue stick on the page and then smooth the tissue paper right down on top of that. Yeah, so I have the really unique experience of getting to discover things about clients with the clients. And sometimes that's really interesting. It's not necessarily a rehearsed story that they often bring to the other team members, like they know what they're gonna say. When we do art therapy and you get to be creative, they often uncover things with me. And so it's really beautiful to be able to see what's transforming within them while they transform within their art. I do get to work with children as well, and that's really cool too, because okay, Okay, so I have a question that says, what about this process do I love? Why is it empowering? And what benefits have I seen come from working with this with my clients? Seems like I answered, but I'm gonna do it again because there's more to it. Thank you, Michael. So I do love getting to discover things simultaneously with my clients, but I also love the process of helping people be creative. A lot of times as people have gotten older, they haven't touched a crayon or a colored pencil or a paintbrush since they were in school or since they were little. And I think people forget how healing art is. And sometimes people just need to be reminded. And so I really enjoy getting to be that person that lets you get your hands dirty and lets you have a place where there are no rules. I'm really big on art therapy not having rules about your art. There is no criticizing, there's no, this doesn't look right. I really encourage people to go in with the expectation of trusting the process and enjoying what you're doing and what you're making rather than being worried about an aesthetic at the end. This is very much something that is about the cathartic experience and about learning how to cope through the art and learning how to tell your story and tell your narrative through the art. It's not about having a perfect piece of art because that's not a thing. That's just not realistic. Why is it empowering? It is empowering for people to create something, especially when you have not created in a long time, or especially when you're used to being criticized and you come into a place where there isn't that criticism and whatever you create is okay. It's actually great. Whatever is made is met with enthusiasm and encouragement and love. And it's really empowering to have something physical to take home that other people like. Yes, it's cool when it's aesthetically pleasing and they like it, but I think it's actually really empowering to learn how to love your art that you thought was ugly. Because Ms. Sharelle's not gonna let you throw it away. So you thought it was ugly, and so now what? We have to look at it because you created it. The mere fact that you created it means that it's not ugly, it's beautiful. It's a piece of you. I think of a piece of you being in every piece of art that you make. And so when clients hear that, they're usually like, she's a little nuts, but all right, I'm gonna do it. Maybe I'll throw it away. Sometimes I see art in the trash can upstairs, but it's okay. It's a different idea. It's sometimes uncomfortable for people to embrace the uncomfortable, but that's a lot of what I'm asking from you. And just be patient with yourself. Sometimes you're painting and it comes off the page or it comes out of the lines. It doesn't look the way you want it to look. That's okay. You don't have to throw it out. You don't have to scrap it. Let's transform that into something else. And what benefits have I seen from working with the clients? I think that I see a lot of benefit in the way people communicate. We do a lot, like I was saying, a lot of frustration tolerance we deal with in art therapy. There's a lot of frustration in having an idea in your mind and your hands not being able to translate it the way you want them to. And you are forced to deal with that. Like, that's just how it is. Sometimes we just have to work with what we have. And so I think that often translates into real life. Like, sometimes things are not working the way I want or need them to, but maybe we can try and reframe it and look at it in a way that works better and that feels better for us. Because sometimes you can't get rid of the circumstance. And so the next question is, so thanks for that first question, Michael. The next one is from Brandon, and it says, what are some of your favorite art supplies to use that you feel not enough people know about, like the chalk pastels, etc.? So I have an answer to that question, but I also want to encourage you that I make art materials out of everything. I am kind of a hoarder in the regard of like right here I have this rock that I found when I was walking cashew, and I thought it was cool, and we're gonna paint it and I'm gonna put it back. So everything is an art material to me. I do love chalk pastels. It's kind of like, for those of you who don't, cashew is my puppy, and chalk pastels are think of like a more potent sidewalk chalk. It's kind of like the sidewalk chalk you used as a kid, but it's very pigmented, so it looks very cool in paper, but it's dusty and it's messy. I also really like something that I think a lot of people don't work with often are natural materials. I love sticks and branches. I like to pick up sticks, and something that's really soothing, I actually have an example right here, is wrapping them. So I like to wrap thread or wire or yarn or whatever I have around the sticks. This one I also have like kind of shaved away at it. So it's really cool to carve into things. I really enjoy working with clay. I think there's something really cathartic about being able to destroy something. Sewing is really reparative. I found in working with clients that lots of people don't think about sewing as art. They think about it as the usefulness of it, to repair things, to make things. But sometimes I like to have clients sew directly into paper. There's something really cool about piercing through that paper, and then, there's usually some transformative means at the end of it, you putting two pieces together, creating an image, or etc. And what else? There are also oil pastels. I really enjoy working with oil pastels because you have the ability to blend and smear and get those materials like kind of mixing. I like to encourage people to make a mess. This is the time you can make a mess, get your hands dirty. You probably haven't finger painted since you were a child. Go ahead and finger paint. If you have the urge to do it, I say embrace it. Just jump right in there. Collaging is also something people usually have old magazines and old papers around. And so I think that's one of those ones I think people don't often think about. Use those magazines, create a vision board, create, a collage of, what you're feeling in that moment. Sometimes I like to maybe just pick a color, and then you can go through that magazine and take out everything in that color, and then you can collage that together, or pick a theme. Maybe if you want, I don't know, your current interests, your current needs, your current wants, you can find pictures that attest to those questions and then pull those out and collage those together. Any other questions? Do I like to listen to music while I do this? I do. Something that's also empowering is giving the client the space to listen to whatever it is that they want to listen to. I think people are often met with judgment about the music, especially if clients are really timid. If there's bad language in the music, they're like, well, there's cursing, and I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna put it on because this is what you want to listen to. I think music can be really helpful to have people feel comfortable. Sometimes clients aren't in the mood to make art, and so they come to art therapy for the opportunity to listen. They like the speaker I have, to listen to their music on the speaker and just sit and talk. But I also do encourage you to sometimes sit in the silence, and I think that can be really uncomfortable for people. Silence is not something that we're used to. We're used to filling the space with like the TV or music or whatever, but sometimes it's really good to just sit with your art and with your thoughts and with the silence, and just after a while you might not even realize that you're sitting in silence. I often like to push clients to listen to something they're not used to. I'll play like African drum beats, or I can play Enya or something that they don't generally pick out themselves. And sometimes they're hesitant, but it's really cool to see what different music can do to the way you feel and see how that translates in the art that you are creating. Ask a question. So there we go. So this one says, what differences and similarities do you see between kids and adults in these activities? My favorite difference is in children, if you get them at the right age or stage of life, there's so much less judgment and there's so much less fear about what they're doing. The kids will see a new material and be like, oh, I've never worked with that. I'm really excited to do it and jump right in. Adults are often worried about like not being good enough at it. And so they're more hesitant in what they create and being willing to like, you know, get their hands dirty and just try. Another thing with, you know, is with kids and adults is kind of the obvious answer that adults sometimes have a little bit more insight into what they've created. With the kids, it's really a partnership with myself and them in finding what they've uncovered in their art. The adults sometimes come in with an idea of like what they want to create or what they think they see, which is, it's not good or bad, but it's really interesting with the children to kind of just watch that discovery in them. Adults are sometimes, there's a little bit more pushback because they aren't necessarily ready to find or to explore these things, which is okay. And so we move a lot slower with adults. Do I find different types of projects better lend themselves to different kinds of healing experiences? If so, what are some examples? Definitely yes. One of my favorites is sewing, like I mentioned before, and the reparative nature of sewing. You can, you know, bring something together. I find sewing to be something that's really useful when someone has had time to process what they've been through and they're kind of in that place where they're ready to move forward. And so I, you know, in the past have had kind of like close to the time of discharge or when someone's getting ready to go home is when we might sew something, or, you know, I give them materials to take home so that they can sew something. I think that there's something really nice about being able to make a mess when you're really feeling the hard feelings and when you're going through the rough stuff. And so when clients first come in, I like to introduce paint, like really just go for it. There's usually like lots of just like mucky colors because people are adding layers upon layers of color. And I think there's something really nice about that. Just get in there, get messy, kind of have a representation of how things are feeling. Things don't feel great. And so you don't have to be okay with what's happening. Like, go ahead and make a mess. I also really like working with clay when people are really having a hard time and in those feelings, because you have the visceral reaction of getting to like scrape away at the clay or squeeze it or pound it or break it or do whatever you need to do to have that sense of release and relief in whatever it is that you're feeling. So what emotions most often prompt you to make art? When does it help you most? I make art a lot when I make art with all emotions. I think I make a lot of art when I'm sad. My art definitely looks different when I'm sad or anxious. If I'm feeling anxious, I definitely make art. It's something that helps ground me and help put me back to feeling present in the here and now. I also make art when I'm happy, but my art looks really different depending on how I'm feeling. When really big things happen in my life, things that are sad or tragic, I think I definitely turn to art at those times to help me process what I'm feeling. Sometimes I can't make sense of what it is I'm feeling, but in the art making process, I am able to kind of make sense of that. Yeah, I think that's when it helps me most, is when things are not feeling good. This question says, you said you enjoyed working with clay. What's a good beginner project using clay? What kind of clay should be used? The most beginner project using clay, I think, is to really just like have at some time exploring the material, like really like get like a big lump of clay, get some water, see what it's like exploring with like a lot of water versus a little bit of water. It's going to be more of a mess, like get your entire hands dirty. I think it's really nice to just start with working with your hands. You don't necessarily need to jump to like throwing on a wheel or anything. But with working with kids, I like to have them create whatever it is they want. So like get lots of like, kids like to roll clay into a ball. So get lots of just spears. But I think that's nice. Like, you know, get to feel that material, roll it into a snake. But in terms of a beginner project, I would say really you can start with paper clay. You can get paper clay at Michael's or like earth clay. The more water you add, the muddier it gets, the messier it gets. And they can usually be air dried or baked. I like air dry clay. And I still didn't answer the project question, dancing around that. I think the project would be just creating something with your hands. Like you don't necessarily need to go in with an expectation of, I want to create a beautiful pot, but I want to create something with this clay. And so maybe if you're enjoying the motion of rolling the clay in your hands, roll a lot of it out and make some coils. Or maybe if you're enjoying like the rolling it into a ball, you can make some kind of sculpture. So just sculpting, kind of letting the material guide you would be my advice for a first project. If you want less of a mess, I would encourage using Sculpey. It's a little bit harder. It comes in little squares. They have lots of different colors, but you can bake it and it gets hard and you can save it. And it's not as messy as earth clay, but I like the earth clay and making a mess with that. Is it as therapeutic leading clients through this as it is partaking in it yourself, or can it be emotionally draining? Is it perhaps a different kind of therapeutic? I think it definitely is a different kind of therapeutic for me. I really enjoy helping people get through what they're dealing with through the art. It can be extremely emotionally draining. And that is when I turn to art myself, is often when I'm feeling kind of drained by this process. It's not draining in a negative way, but sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to be inundated with all of those feelings all the time. And then my art is able to help hold those feelings for me. And it is therapeutic getting to lead this process, because in working with my clients, it's very much a dance of me providing what they need right in that moment. And so I don't always go into it with a specific directive that needs to be completed, but I go into it with, okay, so they're going to come to me with something and I need to present them with a directive that's going to help them deal with whatever they've brought. And so if you're feeling really frustrated or angry, it's going to look different than what I have you do if you're feeling really sad. But it also might not look different. The outcome might be different, but what I encourage you to do or invite you to do might be the same. And so, yes, this paint is dry. I was going to jump right into that. And as you can see, it's not a lot. I only did one layer, but you can't really see what was on the page. So what I would honestly probably do is another layer of this paint, but for the sake of showing you what this will look like, we're going to go ahead and start with one. So I'm going to use a Sharpie, because I think that will show itself best. This is a fine tip Sharpie. I like to kind of do small detail work with these, but it's still permanent. And it works right on top of, it's up here, you can't really see it, but it works right on, let's see, let's get a bigger Sharpie. So I can just go right in there and work directly on top of the paint. And so I'm actually going to probably paint another layer of white on top of this. And so I have like a more opaque canvas to start with. And that's actually kind of the fun thing about working with paint is, so let's say I did this and I hate it, or like a client did this and they don't like it. And so instead of throwing it out or starting over or ripping it off, let's just cover it. We're going to use another layer of paint and go right on top of that so that you can transform it again. And so kind of like the title of this workshop, a lot of what I do and what we do in art therapy is about transforming the feelings or the emotional state that someone is dealing with into something that they can kind of digest and handle in this moment. And so if it's too much for you to think of, you know, you're consistently thinking about your trauma, like maybe we can get that down on paper and you can have another way to look at it, another way to see it, another way to process it, someone else to witness kind of your experience, and a place to tell your story. I think my favorite thing about art therapy is that it gives people a place to tell their story the way that they want to tell their story. You can give me as much or as little as you want, and that's okay. That has to be okay. There isn't really a demand for more or less. Clients have the space to be who they are during that time. So I went in with another layer of some gold and white. But as you see, I got off the edges, which things like that can be really frustrating for people. And so I don't love that. I'm going to cover it with some magazines so that it doesn't matter that the edge is messy. With something like this, there's flowers in the background. So what I might do is look through the magazines and find more images of flowers. And that's Cashew. She's introduced herself. All right. So it's been great. I think I'm done at 2:45. But do we have any last questions before I go? Have you ever found it helpful to discard artwork that you or someone has created as a way of leaving a past emotion behind, or is the goal always to transform? It is sometimes helpful to let things go. And I think getting rid of a piece of art that maybe like if you've gotten that from someone else, so I guess my advice would be, if it's causing you harm or like heartache to hold on to, let go of it. If transforming it feels right, go ahead, maybe destroy it and then use the remnants of the destruction to transform that into something else. But sometimes it's okay to let it go. Sometimes clients will have like artwork they hate and someone else will be like, I actually really like that. And so give it to someone else and they can transform it. But I encourage you to ask yourself why you're getting rid of it. Is it an uncomfortable emotion that you are not willing to sit with? Because then I might encourage you to sit with it before you get rid of it. So just hold on to it maybe for like 2 more days and then get rid of it. But the goal does not always have to be transformation. If it's not right for you, you got to let go of it. Thanks, Sarah. How do you use art therapy at My Sister's Place? So at My Sister's Place, I have the opportunity to work with survivors of domestic violence as well as their kids. We definitely do a lot of coping and healing and, like I said, telling your story through the creation of art. Sometimes people this is when they come to My Sister's Place, it's sometimes the first time they're having any like peace of mind. You know, they have a place where they can sit and be and breathe again. And so the art is there. And, sorry, Cashew. The art is then an opportunity. Sorry. The art is then an opportunity for them to tell their story in a way that feels okay and feels safe to them. So sometimes it's nice to get it out on paper once you feel a little bit safer. You're no longer in that situation. And so the art is definitely a means of coping and healing.